Welcome back to Open Line tonight. We are talking about human trafficking. If you have ever had a question about what exactly it is, how the state of Tennessee is trying to combat this is the night to call. 615-737-PLUS is the number to call. Margie Quin is my guest with End Slavery Tennessee, former TBI agent. You've got your hands all over this issue, and we're so lucky to have you to share some knowledge. I think it's something that we can all learn so much more about, to be vigilant.
Sure.
Because we could look around in our own lives and you never know who we might come in contact with that could be trafficked, because it's very quiet, it's very hidden.
Yes.
Do you do that throughout your life, kind of look around?
I guess I've worked it for so long that yes, I do, because I have children too. I have a child too, so I am pretty hyper vigilant with my child on the internet. Parents can do a lot with their kids to do some preventative work. You know, just talking and having an open communication with your child. I always tell children when I would do programs for children, you know, if a bad guy gets to your kid once, that's on him. But if they get to him twice and 3 and 4 times, then you got to look to yourself. You've not created sort of an open communication where your child felt comfortable, you know, coming to you and telling you what was going on. I'm
glad you brought this up, and we did a story with you on the news side of things just last week about online predators, basically, and how they are luring young victims, and even, you know, women and men too, you know, in 20s, 30s, whatever, through places like Facebook, because Backpage, I think, has now been shut down, right?
Yes.
That used to be really notorious for being...
That was the place.
Yes, the Backpage.com, but now it's even, you know, such common places like Facebook. Tell us how this is working so parents can be alert.
So there are a lot of anonymizing apps I think parents ought to be very concerned about. There are a lot of social media. If kids do not know the person that they're friending, we talked in that interview a little bit about a case in Virginia where you had some traffickers. They were just sending out lures. They were just targeting girls who had sort of open profiles. They didn't have their profiles locked down. And they would send them a message that said, "Hey, I saw your profile. You look great. You know, I'm looking for, I just moved here." I mean, whatever the lure is. And if they send out 200 messages and 2 girls contact them back, they're in business.
That's all they need.
That's all they need.
Wow. And they find, you said they're looking for the open profiles, and then they're really looking for people who may feed off that. Oh, he said I was pretty, or and then it just opens that door just a little bit.
Again, it's that vulnerability.
Yeah.
If you're being raised in a household where you're being neglected, or your parents are very absentee, you're not getting the sort of attention and bonding with a parent or a family member, then you're vulnerable. You're going to be looking for that bond somewhere else. I used to tell parents, if you don't talk to your child, someone else will, and you probably won't like what they tell them.
Yeah. So what do you tell parents to do?
Well, I tell parents to have really open conversation, which my daughter just can't stand. It just
like,
drives her
Mom,
crazy.
Again?
Right. And if parents just can't do that, if the thought of it makes them apoplectic, there are some great tools through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's a great netsmarts.org website, lots of videos, lots of educational stuff on there. It ranges from, and it's age appropriate, so it ranges from preschool all the way to sexting in high schools. And so if parents just can't bring themselves to have that conversation, there are internet tools out there through the National Center, and that's who I would go to. That's who I would trust to.
Give that website one more time.
It's netsmarts.org. Okay. And maybe we can put a link on Channel 5.
Yeah, we'll put a full screen up here in just a little bit. So grab your pen and paper. We'll put that up in just a little bit. So obviously protecting kids from these predators, very important. I wonder where they go from, hey, you're very pretty. What's the next step and the next step and the next step? It's
what we call the old-fashioned sort of grooming process. So I think probably a lot of people have heard that term associated with early childhood sexual abuse. In trafficking, there's a grooming process. There's an isolating that victim from the family. Again, the victim's going to have some sort of vulnerability, some sort of need, and the trafficker's going to meet that need, whatever that is. If it's a father figure, a mother figure, a boyfriend figure, whatever the need is, they're going to meet it, and there's a good chance that that's the first time that need's ever been met for that child. So that becomes a very powerful bond, and frankly, it's a bond that's very difficult to break, because I can't replace that need. As a law enforcement officer, I couldn't replace that need, and so that's why it becomes very difficult to separate the victim from the trafficker.
And I guess once they've gained that trust, they eventually ask the victim to meet?
Yes.
Is that usually how it goes?
So they'll meet, and sometimes it happens very quickly. Introduction of drugs, forced introduction of drugs. Sometimes there's a romance period. We call that, the Romeo pimps.
Right.
They'll boyfriend them, and then it becomes a, if you loved me, you'd do this, and again, it's an evolutionary process.
For a lot of these victims, they are in deep before they realize they are, and then
That's exactly right.
how do I get out?
Yes.
And there seems to be no way for them.
Right, because once that occurs, once that commercial sexual exploitation occurs, once that sex act occurs, then the tables are turned very quickly. Shame and humiliation, again, drug addiction plays a huge part in it. We've seen young victims, 13, 14-year-old victims, drug addicted, kept on drugs, kept on meth, addicted to heroin, and then it becomes, unfortunately, very easy to control a victim based on their drug addiction. Our Tennessee Code, though, does deal with that specifically, and if a trafficker uses that to control a victim, it violates the law in a very specific way, and law enforcement can use that to put a trafficker away. How
tough are our laws? What kind of prison time are we talking about?
Well, when we started this 7-8 years ago, it was a misdemeanor to sell a 14-year-old girl in this state for sex.
A misdemeanor. That's usually less than a year of jail time, if you get that.
Right. Now it's a Class A felony.
Okay.
So we're talking about, murder is a Class A felony. So we're talking about the toughest laws on the books. And again, it vaulted Tennessee in 2015 to #1 in the nation. When Shared Hope started the Protected Innocence Challenge, when they put out what they felt like was the model legal framework for a state to go after trafficking, Tennessee ranked about a B, a C, a B. But there were only 7 states in the nation that had tougher laws than we did. But within a few years, our General Assembly really took that challenge on, and it vaulted us into #1 in the nation. The only areas where we need to continue to do some work is in that victim restoration area. We need to codify some things in the law that automate services for victims.
Because I imagine that has to do with a lot of changing perception.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, you have to go from, oh, well, they asked for it, they were willingly participating, to let's help this person get out of the system, the revolving door.
We call that a paradigm shift in law enforcement. Not dissimilar from the way domestic violence was looked at 30 years ago. Not dissimilar from the way drunk driving before MAD got a hold of us, right? So it's a paradigm shift in the way that we look at things like commercial sexual exploitation of children, of adults. Exploitation is exploitation. And so, yes, it is a change in the way we're all thinking. But it was important that we start by decriminalizing prostitution for minors. We were arresting kids in this state for prostitution.
That's disheartening.
A crime that they couldn't legally engage in to begin with. But that was the first law we passed in 2011 when we returned the results to the General Assembly. And a lot of people have asked me, why do we start there? Why was that the first law we passed?
Well, it kind of seems like a no-brainer, right?
It does, but I felt like we should start as we meant to go on, and that is clearly identifying who the victims are and who the bad guys are. And so that was the first thing we did. We were one of the first 4 states in the nation to decriminalize prostitution for minors. There's still over 25 states that are arresting kids for prostitution. We've got to do something about that.
Where's the disconnect? I mean, it seems like, come on, get on board. Why don't you see this?
Right. Well, some will tell you that if you take that tool away from law enforcement, then these trafficking victims will go right back to their traffickers, and they will. But if they are committing an act of prostitution, there's a pretty good chance they're committing other status offenses or delinquent offenses along with that. I don't think we need to use that as a tool. I don't think we need to label a child as a prostitute in order to separate them from their trafficker. I think we can be, we can use our imagination a little better than that.
You were telling me, just to put some real hard numbers on it, especially the child portion of this, of the 95 open cases in Tennessee right now with trafficking, half of those involve children.
They did. Half of those involved children. When I retired in January, those were the numbers that we were looking at. And the reason is because we're doing such a good job, I think, so much better at identifying victims throughout the spectrum. So from juveniles all the way to adults. We've established some great working relationships with the public sector, with the private sector, these public-private partnerships between entities like TBI and the Department of Children's Services and our nonprofits like End Slavery really have made a difference. It really has turned us around in this state. The Department of Children's Services in the last 3 or 4 years has really come on board with some great policies where we're working very well together. There's a lot of synergy between the public sector and the private sector right now. And that's, I think, why we're doing well.
That has to make such a huge difference.
Oh, sure. It makes all the difference in the world.
Right. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, more information that you need to know about human trafficking right here in Tennessee. Stay with us.